Welcome to PodMagic, real conversations about solving real IT challenges. I'm your host, Bruce Kornfeld, the Chief Product Officer at StoreMagic, and we're always exploring how simple, reliable technology can benefit you and the people you serve, whether that's retail stores, manufacturing sites, or just customers on the front line. My goal is to bring interesting guests, deliver some value, and have fun along the way. So let's dig in. And by the way, I apologize that I won't say what month it is, but it's not Christmas time anymore. We still have our tree up, but it's a good thing. Um, I'm excited about today's episode with Draeger Valencia from Singulr AI. Draeger, good to see you. Why don't you do a quick intro of yourself and what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. So I run go-to-market for Singular AI. We are a company that's focused on helping large organizations really balance the need to be agile and how they adopt AI with risk management. So, ultimately, those companies that are looking to really lean in with AI and drive meaningful business impact, but to do so safely and mitigate risks such as data leak and compliance violations.
So I know that you and your company are focused on the governance side of AI, but let's start on some of the other fun parts of it because AI is everywhere, and usually on these podcasts, AI comes up as one of the questions. But I think we're going to talk about it the whole time today, which is awesome. But let's just talk about infrastructure for a second because there's always an intersection between what we do and what you guys do. But traditional IT infrastructure that we've all been dealing with for decades, if you will, is being impacted by AI. So, how do you see these two things coming together, pros and cons, or just your general thoughts on how AI is impacting overall infrastructure planning?
Yeah, sure. Having come from VMware prior to this and having had some experience in kind of the IT infrastructure side of the house, I think it's getting impacted in multiple ways. Both how IT manages that infrastructure and how opportunities to leverage AI to manage and operate even traditional infrastructure in a more efficient way. Also, considerations around what infrastructure should they prepare for to enable the adoption of various forms of AI. The discussion around should I kind of build out my own infrastructure or maybe lease it has been, a hot topic in my world, at least for the better part of a decade. And, it's largely been around, should I invest in my own private data centers? Should I move to the cloud? And I think as we see customers in various phases of rolling out certain kind of AI initiatives, we see one early trend, which is many customers are very much in an experimental phase related to some of their AI initiatives, where they're really just validating use cases and trying to determine the best approach to driving the outcomes that are intended. And so, by and large, most of the AI consumption that we see is in the cloud, and for the most part, it appears as if there's some sensitivities around investing too heavily in their own infrastructure uh, before they validate some of these business cases and then move these projects from, we'll say, test or pilot phase into production. We are seeing an uptick in private infrastructure, private AI, as it's commonly referred to, especially for those that are highly regulated and who have had some success moving projects into production at scale and are now looking to achieve better economies of scale by kind of moving that infrastructure on premises instead of the traditional kind of cloud rental model.
Well, you bring up a couple of points here that I thought we might get to eventually, but I think we might have to hit them straight on. So one of them is let's talk about success rate. You're closer to how end users are using AI and deploying AI than we are because we're at the kind of infrastructure layer. what are you seeing for success rate? There must be so many um, tests and pilots and proof of concepts going on, but talk about how many of them are you seeing make it to production? Do you have a stat? Do you have a percentage?
So no, not
It's not a
really,
trick
and
question. It's not a trick question,
yeah, yeah,
but go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. No, I don't think we have a stat, and I think it's because there's, as we've seen, it really depends on the type of customer. We saw a number of customers last year, early last year, and actually this reminded me a lot of the early cloud days where there was a general consensus at the leadership level, sometimes the board level, that there should be some value in adopting cloud, but there wasn't a lot of definition around what that meant from business to business. And so some took an approach of, hey, let's go check a box so we can say that we're adopting. But there wasn't as much time and effort put into a strategy around, okay, well, why would we adopt? What problems are we trying to solve? And what's the best way to solve the problems? We saw some similar behaviors, I'd say, where AI was a hot topic, and some were feeling some pressure from the board and their executives to have an answer. What are we doing with AI, and what's our plan to get ahead of this thing? Some took the approach of kind of going out and establishing enterprise license agreements with something like a ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot across the entire company. And I think many of those organizations quickly found out that although the general GBTs do yield value, depending on, let's say, the use case, or the domain in which an individual may use some of these technologies, there's a lot of purpose built, domain specific AI that started proliferating into the market. And I think it's for good reason. I think many of those that just kind of standardized on more of a general purpose model early on saw this immediate uptick as soon as they made it publicly available to the enterprise. They saw a huge spike in adoption for a few weeks. And then over time, it started falling quickly. And as many of them started interviewing their employees to try to understand what was driving the trends, some of the trends we heard the most was, individuals struggled to really understand how to take this general kind of purpose tool and apply it to their
Their
day-to-day
workflow.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would drive
Yeah.
impact. Some
Right.
of it was a lack of training. Some of it was just a lack of targeted use for whatever workflow needed to be enhanced. And I think the organizations we've seen be most successful in driving material impact were the ones that really started by saying, okay, what problem are we trying to solve and for whom? And what do we feel like, AI aside, what do we feel like are some of the biggest gaps that we need to fill in order to solve that problem? And then they started looking at, okay, what's available from an AI perspective that could start to solve some of these issues.
So it sounds like a more purpose-built, very focused approach wins out over the general approach. That's what it's sounding like. Yeah. Yeah.
Indeed, yes, and
Yeah.
also any business or IT transformation, likely comes with a degree of proper planning to get it right. And it's not just the tech, but it's also the people and process that goes into it. And those that I think invest in that in a more holistic approach up front tend to see the success a little faster.
What about okay? So the other thing that you mentioned earlier that I want to dive into is the whole cloud versus on-prem thing. And I'm sure there's no one answer for any one organization, but where we live, it's, as you know, we live at the edge. So our solutions are targeting customers that are either small enterprises that have one or two sites, or they're large enterprises where they have data centers and clouds somewhere else, but they have 1,000 stores or they have 1,000 locations. So we're in those small locations. For those, so if you put your brain around like the small sites of big companies, Where do you see, or what advice do you have? I guess cloud makes a lot of sense for early on and proof of concepting, but at some point, does it make sense to bring the AI tech on-prem as well?
Yeah, I certainly not the best resource to give advice on the topic, but I can tell you what I'm hearing from
Yeah.
clients, and I had the benefit of working with likely some mutual customers of Store Magic in the retail space specifically. I think at a high level, a lot of folks are looking at this. I mean, it's fascinating. We saw a pretty significant pendulum swing with just cloud and data center before AI, where there was like, okay, cloud, 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 and then over time, even as recent as the last few years, with large organizations, we saw a lot of money being pushed back into on-prem data center away from the cloud. I think as enterprises learned how to manage and operate these data centers in a more scalable fashion, the the economic value of running them on prem began to go back up, and so I think that's probably carried through into AI and the way businesses are looking at, or I should say, projecting the future. By and large, a lot of what we're hearing from customers is really what you were just referring to. While they're in POC phase and until they validate business cases behind these investments, they like the what I call the rental model. It's one that if it doesn't work out, then they're not on the hook. As some of these projects move into production, and again, we're already seeing this, especially in some of the large financial services providers, as well as healthcare, large patient care providers, where there's specific projects that are fully baked. They, in many cases, it's a combination of third-party AI technology and in-house development, and they've started moving those on premise based on just the economics behind it. So if I'm a betting man, my guess is over time we'll start to see a similar trend, particularly with larger organizations who already have the means to manage and operate their own on-premise infrastructure.
How would you react? How would you react to this concept? Because it feels like what we hear from some customers, not all, but leave the models in the cloud, but because of the need for fast, real time answers, do the inferencing at the small sites. Does that sound like something that you've run into as well in your trials and working
It
with
does. It
customers?
does. And it also just sounds like an evolution of, I mean, even prior to AI, big buzz around edge computing for the same purpose. And so, yeah, I would imagine both performance and cost will continue to drive decisions around infrastructure. And over time, depending on the nature of the project, performance may outwin cost. That's certainly what we're seeing now, where cost is kind of an afterthought. Also, this may sound familiar for those that went through the early days of the cloud, where it was like, okay, we're going to jump towards performance for the sake of performance. And then over time, as people started getting hit with, surprise bills or unexpected bills, then cost became an element. Right now there just seems to be such a, especially here in the States, such a almost like gold rush to get to AI, to be less behind than your closest competitor. We haven't seen cost be a significant decision point over performance. But at some point, I think businesses will look to strike the balance.
There's no lack of investment going around the industry in terms of data center and build outs. That's for sure. It's a lot of
That's,
yeah, there's a lot
yeah,
of attention
no
there.
doubt.
All right, let's move to something that I'm sure you're opinionated about. Let's talk about governance, AI governance. So this is an area that I don't have a lot of experience in. So why don't you tell me about how does that work? So you talk to your end users about AI governance. Do you find that it's possible for there to be a perception that with AI governance that could slow down um, deployments, or is there a way to add the right governance and not slow down progress?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, I think governance, especially if you're talking to the builders, the folks that are focused on innovating, governance has been a bit of a four-letter word in years past, and not too dissimilar to cybersecurity, where even in security, it's always been this kind of trade-off. If you want performance, and you must concede or make sacrifices related to security. And I see a lot of parallels between the two. Ultimately, so we had one of our customers use this analogy with us the other day that I figured I would adopt. You know, AI without proper governance and oversight and control is kind of like a Formula One car without brakes. It's dangerous, and it's impossible to finish a winner, right, without the brakes. And we see the exact same thing, and I can give a few examples where that kind of validates this point.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some.
Yeah, so we have worked with a number of customers that prior to utilizing a platform like ours, they were leaning on really traditional IT security based kind of technology and like a security and IT stack to handle certain elements of governance, and one would be like access control, even some DLP to kind of better determine when maybe sensitive information might be getting exposed to a model or an application. But by and large, there was a significant lack of context that was important for the business to understand. One is AI operating as we intended, and it's not just human to non-human. Now we've got quite a bit of examples within our customer base of agents being deployed out into the enterprise, accessing enterprise systems. I lost my train of thought.
Take a pause and tell another example. We'll edit stuff out. Don't worry.
Yeah, yeah. So examples of where the lack of governance created effectively a false start. It was um, you know projects were released with out much oversight to access and the type of data that was getting exchanged. As a result, unintended consequences proliferated and set those projects back. So a common example that we've seen in the news a few times is employees that accidentally leaked intellectual property or some form of sensitive information, um, which one creates a kind of a costly scenario as it relates to fines, especially for those that are in a regulatory space. But then it also creates a confidence issue amongst their customers and even in kind of internal shareholders around their ability to deliver on these projects effectively. And so where the desire to move faster uh, forced a scenario where thinking about controls and oversight and governance was a kind of an afterthought. Um, the lack of effectively created this trial and error that increased the total cost of those projects and delayed the time in which those projects delivered any real value. Some of them are still back to square one, where they're now approaching it from that more methodical uh, viewpoint, which is what problem am I trying to solve, and what outcome am I trying to deliver, and how do I protect this investment to ensure that I'm driving that outcome as effectively as possible.
All right. So I've got a question. I mean, if you don't want to answer this one, that's fine, but let's try. You could always take a pass. So I've got a question about your solution because it's something that we struggle with as well. It's like we have plans, we're implementing AI, and there's always that nervousness, cautious about what about our IP? You know, how do we make sure that we have the right governance in place to prevent our team from doing something accidentally wrong, let's say. So, how does your solution help end users solve that or prevent that from happening?
Yeah. Thanks for teeing it up. It's a good question. Our approach is by enabling our customers with complete awareness of what's happening in their environment. And it really starts at just understanding from a, let's say, AI asset or an inventory perspective, what LLMs, what agents, what third party services are being utilized, and where are they being used. Because not all AI presents risk, right? If you have, let's say, an enterprise license agreement of Grammarly, and where you have control to turn model training off, and you've negotiated, data privacy terms that protect you contractually in addition to the controls that they provide. The concern or risk around your data leaking is much lower than if, let's say, an employee accidentally logs into their free account of Grammarly, which is catching every keystroke on your laptop and is training on the data. There's no free in AI. You become the product at that point, and they're utilizing the data to train those models. And we've seen examples of how those models can be exploited for bad actors to pull that information out. And once it's gone for good. So our approach is very much around ensuring, one, that there are no blind spots for our central IT, central security teams. Understand what is in your environment, validate what you believe also ensure that any unknowns are thoroughly vetted, and you have the context to say, okay, wait a minute, I did know that we had 800 seats of Grammarly, but now I see there's 200 examples of employees using a free account. How do you prevent that for the future? And it doesn't just go for these third-party services. It could be models. We've seen examples in which central IT teams approved a specific model for an in-house developed application. And then, 6 months down the road, that line of business who owns that application decided to update to a new model, right? Innovation's happening fast. And if these applications aren't keeping pace with innovation, then, they risk the likelihood of not delivering the business impact that it was intended. So, but how do you ensure that that new model that didn't necessarily go through your governance process, that there was a security scan run and that it came in clean, right? That it didn't become effectively a Trojan horse. So our approach is by making sure that whether it's a homegrown agent or LLM or any third-party type service or application that the business may be using, that central IT and security teams know about it and understand what risks they may pose, whether it's compliance, security, privacy, or even just risk of opportunity cost, because let's say somebody's using a type of service that could be a free account when the business is already invested in something else. So they're not getting the same ROI that they would have expected out of what they invested.
So it sounds like your technology has a way of assessing what's out there on the corporate network and doing a risk assessment. You understand the models that exist. You actually can go find private ones or homegrown models as well, and you can help them make assessments on risk around that. That sounds pretty cool, actually.
That's right.
I didn't know what you
Yes,
did.
sir.
Now I know.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. All right.
Well,
What about?
happy to show you a demo, Bruce, and help out Store
Oh,
Magic.
yeah. Next podcast. All right. How
There you
about
go.
what are you seeing with your clients about building their own applications? Are people using off the shelf? Are you seeing a lot of homegrown? What do you see working the best these days?
Yeah, mixed bag, but I can share maybe some examples of what we've seen that could be interesting for some. So a few things. One, especially as it relates to let's say productivity focused use cases. We've seen some customers be fairly successful in buying something off the shelf that was purpose built, for that particular use case, simply for the purpose of validating the use case itself, right? So they buy something that was already built for I don't know, let's say code generation, and then run some initial tests to determine, okay, do we feel like this is something we could really scale out and drive some material impact? And then once they got through that initial validation phase, many of them have started looking at, well, okay, how can I do some of my own internal development to make this type of service more specific to my business and my business needs? And I think a lot of enterprises have started hiring some talent that has the ability to build some of this stuff in house. Whereas last year, and look, I still think one of the big problems outside of just power and energy, one of the big problems that will still likely be an issue through this year and maybe even years to come is a skill set shortage. There's not enough experts to support all the business demand out there. But when businesses are fortunate enough to grab a few key players that understand how to develop in this space, I think we've seen them be fairly successful taking a third party that's already built effectively a prototype that they've been able to validate the use case internally, and then turn that around and go build something on their own that more precisely meets their specific business needs and scale. I mean, again, most of our client interaction are in the larger enterprise market, so not trying to signal that there will be some big pullback related to third party across all markets. I think there will be plenty of demand in some large enterprise, and then quite a bit of mid market and even smaller companies to still just buy something off the shelf that was purpose built.
Well, unless everyone's wrong, meaning AWS and Oracle and everyone building these big data centers for AI, unless they're all wrong, there's going to be opportunity for a lot of innovation over the coming years. So I'm sure there's no one right answer. What about shadow AI? So I assume it exists. Um, what advice does your company have on? Does it matter? How do you deal with it? How do you define it? Like, is shadow AI a big problem these days, or could it get worse?
Yeah, so I mean, we kind of alluded to this, or I kind of alluded to this in effectively our elevator pitch earlier. We are seeing shadow AI quite often. I think what we found is it's taken on a lot more meaning in the past 12 months. I think most people, when they hear the term, I mean, first of all, the term shadow on its own for some has become kind of a negative, has a negative connotation. And I think depending on the organization, the idea of the workforce out experimenting for the purpose of innovation isn't necessarily a negative on its own. That typically there's good intention behind some of this activity that maybe it's not formally sanctioned by IT or security teams. The issue is businesses, look, by and large, most leaders are expected to have an answer for how they're leveraging AI to drive impact to their customers, their internal customers, their external customers, top line revenue, improve margin, et cetera. One or all of those areas are, a top 10, if not top 3 initiative for most leaders on the IT side, security side, privacy side, lines of business, et cetera. So, not having visibility of what AI is in use and how it's being used is in direct conflict with the need to go back and explain to shareholders or whomever it may be how AI is how you're maximizing the impact of the usage. So one is just having a clear understanding of, are you using it in the best way possible, and is it driving the impact expected? If you're not monitoring that usage, it's a complete blind spot. The other issues that I think are most commonly talked about are, it's almost like the old cybersecurity adage, which is, well, you can't protect what you don't know about, what you don't see. It's true. It's probably overused, but it is true. If you don't know that, let's say an agent that, an autonomous agent has gone rogue and is now accessing a system and over accessing information, then how do you maintain a level of awareness of your risk posture? And if you are aware of that risk, you're in a much better position to remediate that risk. The only other thing I would add is it's so common for people to associate the term shadow AI with just whether or not there's a kind of a known or sanctioned AI service, LLM agent. There's a whole world of shadow activity that happens within sanctioned services and projects. I'll give you a really good example where, we had a large financial services customer who had approved one service for a very specific department within the business, and for a use case that was internal facing only. And 6 months later, they found out through a help desk ticket that another department had indirectly exposed a prompt to an external customer that fundamentally changed the risk posture of that entire exchange. So, nothing about that specific service was shadow on its own, but the scope of who was using it and how they were using it, that was completely unknown to the central IT privacy and security teams.
Nice. I remember hearing, you don't hear it these days much anymore, but shadow IT, I think, referred to back in the early days of cloud and SaaS, right? Where departments weren't dependent on their IT department. They just went off and found applications. But I wonder if shadow AI is even a bigger problem, because shadow IT usually meant you have to purchase something. You had to buy a SaaS application, whereas ChatGPT can be free, Gemini can be free. So there's probably all sorts of projects going on that didn't cost the company any money, except for the time that people are spending. So it's an area that I'm sure will evolve over the coming quarters and years. All right, one last one for you, real quick. Just an opportunity for you to say whatever the heck you want. A prediction. So pick one thing that you think is going to happen in the next, I don't know, year, 2 years, 3 years around AI. Yeah, just give us one prediction that you might have, and then we'll close on that.
This is a trap
You
in the
can't be
context
wrong. You can't be wrong. It's
of
all your
AI.
prediction, right?
Look, this is probably uh, probably an easy way out, but my prediction is we will look back a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and all feel like we underestimated just how transformational this moment in time is. I don't know exactly how that will, what that means related to the job market or innovation in certain areas. We are already seeing some really promising, amazing things through AI, healthcare, for example, and better assessing when someone may have an illness that you would want to catch as early as possible. Just diagnostics in general is showing some really positive early signs, regardless of the forms of diagnostics. We're also seeing some pretty impressive and scary or I guess enhancements in cybersecurity threats as a result. So I think there's both a lot of positive and some potentially dangerous outcomes that could come out of all of this innovation. But I think regardless of what 12 or 24 or 36 months look like, I think we will, almost all of us will look back and say, wow, I knew it was big. I didn't realize it would be this transformational. That's my bet.
You've got my support. I agree. I see it happening already. So, listen, Draeger, thank you so much for joining PodMagic. It's great having you. Great conversation. I learned a lot. So, appreciate you educating me about governance and AI. That was awesome. And hope to have you back
Thank you for
someday, maybe
having
for a
me.
demo. Who knows? And thanks to
We'd
everyone.
love to do it.
Thanks to everyone for joining. This is PodMagic. My name is Bruce Kornfeld. Real conversations about solving real IT challenges. So come again, watch all the previous versions we've had, hit the like button, the share button, tell your family and friends. We'd love to have you back. Thanks for joining.